Hey everyone, I want to welcome you back to 5th grade math on this lovely Tuesday. What I want us to do today is to connect some of the things that we've been working on to a strategy that's a little bit more pencil paper and less hands-on, less picture, okay? So last week we used graph paper to multiply mixed numbers, okay? So I want us to go back over that for just a second, and then I want to connect it to something you learned as a 4th grader, and hopefully this will be a big help to you. So let's start out by looking at the problem. 3 1/4 times 3 1/2, okay? So if I wanted to create an area model on my grid, on my graph paper here, I would go over 3, and then I'm going to go over 1/4. I'm going to mark it so that I can see what I'm doing there. Can you see my fourths? And so I'm going to go over to that 1/4 mark. So basically I turned that little square right there into a number line, okay? And then I'm going to go down 3 1/2. Halves are a little bit easier to mark, and then I'm going to connect and make my rectangle. Okay. So if you remember, last week we talked about looking at the whole square units first, right? And we would count and see that those were 9 because we have 3 across and 3 down. We would look at all of these halves right here. We would look at all of these 1/4 over here. And then we would look at that little section right there, and we would determine based on what we know and how we've split our other squares that this little section right here would be 1/8. And then we would put all of those numbers together, right? Well, I want us to look at it in just a little bit of a different way. As a 4th grader, you multiplied larger numbers using an area model, right? You did something that looked like this. We'll draw it out here. So it might have looked something like this right here, right? It's for 321 times 47, and you would multiply 300 times 40, 300 times 7, and you would get all of your products within that area model, and then you would add those together, right? Guess what? We can do the exact same thing with these mixed numbers. So our problem was 3 1/4 times 3 1/2. I'm going to set it up the same way. 3 1/4 times 3 1/2. All right. So let's look at our whole numbers. We have 3 times 3, which is what? 9. So if we looked at our graph, we know that there's 9 square units within that. That's what that means. This section would be over here where I have 3 1/4. So 3 times 1/4. Remember that dot can be the same thing as a multiplication sign. Okay, it means the same thing. So 3 times 1/4 is 3/4, right? Then in this section, we've got 3 times 1/2. Well, I know that if I put 2 halves together, that's a whole. So 3 times 1/2 is 3 halves. That's the same as 1 1/2, isn't it? And then yesterday, we talked about multiplying fractions. So in this box right here, we're going to look at 1/4 times 1/2, and we determined in our picture that that would be 1/8. Now, we have a whole bunch of partial products, parts of this answer to add together. Now, here is the really, really cool thing about this. As a 5th grader, you've worked on everything that has to do with related fractions when you add them together, okay? So all of these fractions are going to be related to this guy right here, which is eighths. So we can turn all of these into eighths so that we can put them together, okay? So I'm going to start with 1 1/2. So my math brain tells me that 1 1/2 is the same as 1 4/8. I just know that 4 is half of 8, so I don't have to really do a whole lot to think about that one. All right, so then we've got 3/4 up here. If I change that to eighths, I know that if I take those fourths and split them into 2 parts, that'll give me 8. So 4 times 2 is 8. 3 times 2 is 6. And then this is already in eighths. So I am putting together 4/8 plus 6/8 plus 1/8. Okay? So 4 plus 6 is 10 plus 1/8, that's 11/8. And then my whole numbers, 9 plus 1 is 10. So my product is 10 and 11/8. However, I know that 11/8, that's going to be more than a whole, right? I know that, keep changing color markers. I know that my 11/8 has an 8/8 in it. I apologize, guys. We're really not having an earthquake. I'm just trying to get you where you can see my writing. All right. So this right here is made up of 8/8 and 3/8. Okay? That 8/8 makes a whole, doesn't it? So my answer really is 11 3/8. So you can break down these problems this way and then use what you know about adding and subtracting fractions to add those products together. Let's try another, okay? Let's do this problem right here. 4 1/2 times 2 2/3. So we're going to set it up the same way. So I've got 4 1/2, 2 2/3. All right. So we're going to multiply each of these sections to find out what the total is in those, what the product is. So let's start with 4 times 2. That's 8. All right. So over here, we've got 2 times 1/2. That's 2 halves, isn't it? But guess what? 2 halves is the same value as 1 whole. All right. So here we've got 4 times 2/3. That'd be 2/3, 4/3, 6/3, 8/3. And then here we've got 2/3 times 1/2. That equals 2/6. Okay, so we've got some numbers to put together here. I know that my related fractions is going to be 6. I notice I have thirds and sixths, so that's pretty easy for me to work with. So before I do that, I noticed that this 8/3 is bigger than a whole. So let me break that one down. I have 3/3 plus 3/3, that's 6/3 plus 2/3 gives me 8/3. So really this one equals 1, 2, and 2/3. Okay. So now I can put these together a little bit easier. So I've got 2/3 and I want to change that to sixths. Let me come over here. I know that I can change thirds to sixths by splitting them into 2 parts. So 3 times 2 is 6. 2 times 2 is 4. So really, this is 2 4/6 plus 2/6. So that would be 2 6/6 down here at the bottom. Up here at the top, 8 plus 1 is 9. So I've got 11 and 6/6. I know that 6/6 is the same thing as a whole, right? So really, I have 9, 10, 11, 12 wholes. So you'll notice that when I do this, I have writing everywhere on my paper because there's a lot of things that go into this, okay? As you work on this, you may notice that you don't have to break down your improper fractions to turn them into whole numbers. You may just know it. So some of this you may not have to jot down, okay? I'm just showing you on this all of my thinking, okay? This is just another strategy that we can use to multiply mixed numbers. Now, before I let you go, I want to just double check this on my graph paper and make sure that what I have there matches my 12 whole squares that I have on my area model there. So when I draw this, I'm going to go over 4 1/2, and I'm going to go down 2 2/3, and I'm going to make my rectangle. I'm going to show it to you here in just a second. Okay. So if I look at this section here, I have 8 holes, right? Now, if I look right here, this is where I multiplied 2. Hold on here. There we go. 2 times 1/2 right here, right? 1/2 and 1/2. So that made 1. Down here, I put those 2/3. There's 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, 4/3, 5/3, 6/3, 7/3, 8/3 that I got at the bottom. And I know that 1, 2, 3 make a hole. 1, 2, 3 make a hole. There's 2 holes right there and 2/3. And then this, if I look at the whole thing, is going to be 2/6. I changed my 2/3 to 4/6, and I know that this made a hole. So I had 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I can match up my thinking this way, okay? So using the graph paper is cool. If you feel like you're ready to try this, that's cool. It's just another strategy to do it. I am going to leave you with one to try. Use whatever strategy you would like to. I would like for you to try this one right here. 5 1/2 times 3 1/2. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.